bona fide beats. Heavy hit splits, wild file style, freak flows fast, close chord dial, make links slate at the 8 pass, make more papes, too tired, crash, self-serve cake, all night nag, hurry home now, girl.
Welcome you guys back to the last roster edition episode of the Deepwater Podcast. Tomorrow we're going to be recording our draft episode, which we will try to drop as soon as possible before the draft. But today what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and run through these defensive backs really quickly to go ahead and get this episode out there. So let's not waste any time, and let's start with the largest addition the Dolphins made in this offseason, and that's cornerback Byron Jones from the Dallas Cowboys. And first things first, let's go ahead and deal with the money. Byron Jones signed a 5-year, $82.5 million contract that included a $15 million signing bonus, an average salary of $16.5 million, and $46 million guaranteed at signing, with a total of $54 million guaranteed. That is a lot of money. And the Dolphins actually gave themselves an out before he turns 30. And you can see here after the 2022 season, there's a potential out after 3 years at $54 million with $6 million in dead cap. Okay, so let's look at the player. What do we like to do whenever we bring in a new player? They have to be coming into their 4th or their 5th year. And let's look at the combine evaluation that they gave for Byron Jones at the NFL's website. He's an instinctive cornerback with good size and adequate speed. He has the ball skills and anticipation needed for the position. Jones' balance and overall athleticism could be a concern in man coverage, and his season-ending shoulder injury will need to be examined. He would be an interesting free safety prospect with his instincts, but might lack the physicality for the position. Now, I'm going to do something a little different here. I'm going to add in Daniel Jeremiah's analysis of Byron Jones coming out, and you can see that this is from 2015. And I'm not going to read the entire thing, but what I want you to notice is that Daniel Jeremiah predicted that Jones could be a real steal in this draft. He should start day one in a press man scheme. So what I'm seeing, and not just from Daniel Jeremiah or not just from the NFL, you find other evaluators out there who really felt like Byron Jones was a better prospect at safety than he was at corner. And initially in his Dallas career, he started out at the safety position. And while he was a decent safety, things really took off for Byron Jones when he got moved to the cornerback position. And that move began when Chris Richard was brought into Dallas. And if you don't know who Chris Richard is, Chris Richard was the guy that I initially wanted the Dolphins to hire when they were looking for a head coach. Brian Flores was not my first choice. And to be honest with you, I got that completely wrong at this point. I would recommend that you go back and watch the coaching episode that I'm going to put right here in this link in the description, because Brian Flores did a much better job in Miami than he was given credit for. And what I did is I used a statistical analysis to prove the point, because it's not just players on losing teams that get snubbed in their peer group. It's also the coaches. And because the Dolphins only won 5 games, the job that Brian Flores actually did in Miami was completely undervalued. I highly recommend that you watch that episode, because it's some of the best work that we've done here on this channel. But back to the player. What did Miami get in Byron Jones? Byron Jones is an extremely athletic corner. But one of the main things is Byron Jones, his athleticism pops out on tape, but you can't forget about his instincts, and you can't forget about his study habits and the fact that he's a leader. He can turn, he can run with any wide receiver with that 4.36 speed. He's long, he's tall, and we already know what kind of a performance he put up at the combine from a jumping standpoint, right? He doesn't get beat over the top. He's physical at the high point of the ball, and he's just a smart player. And what the Cowboys actually got in that draft at that position was something that I believe they should have kept. I believe that they were so concerned about keeping that offense together that they really, really missed out on keeping an important position in any defense because good corners are not only hard to find, they're almost impossible to let go when you find one. And I honestly can't believe that Dallas let him go and chose to keep some of the other players that they chose to keep. Now, I'm not going to get into that because that's the Cowboys, that's Jerry Jones, and they have one thing they have done well is they've drafted well in Dallas. They don't have to go into free agency in Dallas. And there's organizations out there that just have to do that because they don't draft well. But I was really, really surprised that they let a player like Byron Jones walk away in free agency. So the Dolphins actually, in my opinion, I know it's a lot of money, but schematically, what you can do with a pair of corners like Byron Jones and Xavier Howard, that gives you a lot of flexibility on the defense. And another overlooked aspect of picking up Byron Jones is Byron Jones spent a lot of time in the slot early in his career as a nickel covering tight ends. And I think that helped him develop more on the outside. He can also play safety. So schematically, there's a lot of things that Miami can do with this guy. Okay. I don't need to go into any type of an analysis on Xavier Howard because we know what we have in Xavier Howard. But the question with Xavier Howard is, can Xavier Howard's knees hold up? That is my only concern with X. That's it. That brings us to the only other pickup that the Dolphins made in the secondary, and that's Clayton Fejedelem. And he's an interesting pick because he's an excellent special teams player, but I'm going to go to the NFL's analysis of him coming out again, and I'm going to tell you what I think that Miami has in Fejedelem, okay? He's very tough with the mindset teams are looking for from box safeties. Unfortunately, box safeties are being replaced with safeties with better coverage talent and athleticism, and that may be an issue for Fejedelem. He will need to ball out as a special teamer and fit with the team who still employs box workers at safety. And it looks like that's exactly what he did during his time with Cincinnati. And he can still be used in that manner in Miami. In those games, like when you face a team such as a Baltimore or the Patriots, where they can get really physical by lining up with 2 tight ends or 3 tight ends and a fullback, those are the scenarios where you need a box safety. And that's the role that Rashad Jones used to play in Miami. Now, I'm not comparing this guy to Rashad Jones. Let's not even remotely take that into consideration. But we all know that Brian Flores has had success developing defensive backs. Okay. So what I want to do now is I want to point out something interesting about the way that the Dolphins list players on their roster in the secondary. And as you can see, here's the list that the Dolphins have. These are all of the corners and defensive backs in Miami. And if you haven't picked it up, here it is for you. You notice some players are listed as cornerbacks while others are listed as defensive backs. Initially, I thought that was players who could play corner and players who could play safety, which still may be true. But I do find it intriguing that they list these players in this manner. And if you go to the safeties, they only list 3 safeties on the roster, which is Bobby McCain, Montre Hardage, and Adrian Colbert. I don't think anybody is comfortable outside of Brian Flores with Bobby McCain playing free safety. That looked like a disaster waiting to happen last season, and that was before he got hurt. But one player that I do want to note that's kind of a forgotten man in this process is Cordrea Tankersley. And let's look at what the NFL said about Cordrea Tankersley coming out. He has an impressive body of work as a lockdown boundary cornerback, but he has some holes in his transitions that could open the door for more separation on the next level. While he's not always the most fluid in his coverage, his 6'1" frame and 8 interceptions will be 2 numbers some teams will focus heavily on. If he runs well at pre-draft workouts, his stock could soar thanks to his size and production. Well, Cordrea ran a 4.40 at the combine. That's part of the reason why he got selected so high. In his rookie year, he actually played well. He played well enough to be penciled in as the starter. But That knee injury that he had late in the season is what cost him a whole lot of time. And I quietly believe that Brian Flores and Chris Greer may have a lot of confidence in this young guy. He was a young player playing fairly well under a bad coaching staff, and then he got hurt. He tried to go late in the season, but it was evident that he would not be able to get into football shape in enough time. So I think he's an interesting player to watch coming into this camp. Now, Cordray, along with Nick Needham, I believe that gives the Dolphins a lot of options at the corner position for when Xavier Howard or Byron Jones just need a breather. And Bobby McLean should possibly move back to the nickel position. I'm actually looking for the Dolphins to draft a free safety or maybe even two safeties in this draft. But we're going to get into more about that on the draft episode that we're going to record tomorrow, because this is just a quick run through of the defensive backs. So for the last time, let's go ahead and break these buckets out. And let's go ahead and place these defensive backs, cornerbacks / safeties into these buckets. Beginning with studs. Miami doesn't have any studs. I understand that a lot of you guys are really excited about the prospect of bringing in Byron Jones, but until he does it in a Miami uniform or he's done it for a longer period of time than what he's done, I'm not going to classify him as a stud. And I'm also not going to classify Xavier Howard as a stud. What are they? They're both starters, in my opinion. Until Xavier Howard gets over the injury bug and until Byron Jones does it in a Miami uniform, I can't lump him into that category because too often players change teams, players change coaching staffs, players change schemes, and they don't look like the same player that they were before they came to Miami. Okay. Does Miami have any starters at safety? I believe that Eric Rowe can be a starting safety in Miami. Okay. I would be comfortable with Eric Rowe starting at the free safety position in Miami. What about Bobby McCain? I can see Bobby McCain as a starting nickel, but I can't see Bobby McCain as a starting safety in Miami. Do we have any other starters that I'm comfortable with? I would have to say no. Even though I like Nick Needham a lot, I'm not ready to call Nick Needham a starter. So what box does Nick Needham fall in? Nick Needham is an incumbent. He's an incumbent along with Cordray Tankersley and Clayton Fejedelem. And everybody else knows what box that they fit in. Okay. So I told you this, guys, that this was just going to be short because we have already moved on. And what we're going to do tomorrow is I'm going to have my first guest on the show because there's enough episodes with it just being me talking. And I know that gets boring. So tomorrow I'm going to have my first guest on the show. And this is a fan who reached out to me and commented and actually wanted to be a part of the show. And if you guys reach out to me, we can work something out and get you guys onto the show too, because the more perspectives that you get, the more there's an opportunity for everybody to learn. And one of the things I want to do is there's a particular commenter that's reached out on several occasions and given me feedback, and I'd like to recognize him right now. And that's Milton Hunter. I'd like to thank him for reaching out and constantly challenging the podcast, because the more perspectives, the better. And I'm going to try to invite him to see if he wants to contribute to the show, or if he has his own thing, that's also fine. But I enjoy our conversations because it's always good to acknowledge what your weaknesses are and to try to work on those weaknesses. And we had an interesting debate about the draft, and I'm going to share that in the very next episode of the podcast when we break down this draft. So thank you to everybody for listening and tuning in. Click like, subscribe, and please hit that bell so you get a notification as soon as a new podcast drops. This will be the last short episode because we're going to go into some details when we cover this draft, just because of the nature of the fact that the draft is 7 rounds and there's a lot to talk about. So I look forward to seeing you guys on the other end. Please tune in, and there's going to be some interesting things on that show. Take care.
smarter than me, you ain't smarter than me. Solo nice, bonafide beats, heavy hit spits, wildfire style, freak flows fast, close chord dial, make links late at the 8 pass, make more papes, too tired.